Starting with collage paper is a perfect way to jumpstart your art journal process. Hi, I'm Creative Katie, Karen Burchill. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm working on my 7x10 Canson Mixed Media art journal. I've taken it out of the coil to be able to work on it flat. And I've grabbed some gel prints and collage papers. I've picked the colors, just that's what my mood was, and I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. So this is a great place to start when you don't know where to go. The collage papers are going to add texture, color, pattern, and they can jumpstart the next step. Sometimes you're going to see a lot of what goes down in this first layer. Sometimes it's just going to lead the way and guide the creative process. I like using papers that have different weights. Some of those papers are deli papers. There's some on tissue papers. I like to use coffee filters, copy paper, mixed media paper, what have you. The variety adds texture to the background, and I like to layer them up. So here I've got pinks and blues and purple, and this is really going to shape the color scheme for this page. These colors are analogous, they're close to each other on the color wheel. When I mix wet paint on it, it's going to make pleasing colors. It's not going to turn into mud. So now that I've somewhat arranged them, I'm just gluing everything down with my fluid matte medium. You can use gel medium too, but I recommend using matte because you don't need the shine at this stage. Now, when I'm doing this page in particular, I don't know where I'm going. I don't have a theme in mind. I don't have a focal image. I don't have any idea where it's going. I simply wanted to create, and I just wanted to start playing with color. And using collage papers, great way to use something in your stash and jumpstart the creative process. So if you're stuck, start by pulling out some collage papers or gel prints. Now I want to add some more interest into the background, so I'm spreading some black acrylic paint and then I'm braying it onto this sparkly Motif stamp. I love this stamp. I'm not exactly happy with how it's stamping on here, but my goal at this stage is simply to put some more pattern down and maybe some texture using the acrylic paint. So I'm just going with it. Spoiler alert, you don't see a lot of this. Then I take this geonetting stencil and I'm pushing thick gesso through the stencil. This is going to add very subtle pattern and texture to the background. Now, I apologize. I colorize this by taking the colors, the quinacridone magenta and a navy, and spreading it across the background. And as you can see, this background got fairly dark. So I wanted to brighten it up, so I grabbed some white, and I'm using this numbers jumble stencil. I don't really care if the numbers show up. Now, I have an idea that I'm going to paint over these numbers, but when you stencil with white and then you put a layer or a wash of color over top, it still shows quite well. I use this stencil in here. We don't see any of that. I'm not really happy with what showed up. Adding some more white, I've got some round motifs. This is from the Winged Mosaic stencil. And I love this little motif that's in the corner. So I'm really liking the background right now, but I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. when in doubt, add some bling. So I grabbed a couple of my DIY mark makers and I'm stamping with gold. Just going to add some bling and a few more marks to this background. And then I use the lid of a container and I'm just stamping some circles on here. And this, using these circle motifs, gets it in my head to make kind of a wreath on the background. Now here I'm knocking back some of that white, bringing up the pink color. And off camera, I add more of that, more blue. I end up knocking back the white because I want my focal image to be fairly white and I want there to be contrast. So I'm just rubbing this. I do rub more of it so that all that white is knocked back. Now I grab some tracers and I'm making a circle to make a wreath with two sides. Now I have these printables, these daisy printables. I've resized them. I'm picking the smaller one. The big one just seemed a little too large for this page. Then I decide, what if I stenciled on some leaves? So I'm knocking back some more of that white. And as you get ideas, you can see as I'm getting ideas, I'm altering what's there to make it fit my idea. And that often is the case when you don't know. So I'm stenciling with black here. And my plan is to go around the wreath and have the leaves be part of the wreath. Now I'm liking this stencil and I'm liking how it looks on the wreath. What I don't like is the black. It's not showing up enough. Didn't think I needed to do white. Didn't want to introduce green, so I very quickly took a baby wipe, got rid of all of that leaf stenciling, and I'm just painting the wreath white. I'm unsure at this point in time if I'm going to paint this or if I'm going to leave it white. Who would have left it white? Leave me a comment below. Just adding a little more paint. But you can see that texture, those collage papers at the beginning and the gesso that I pushed through the stencil is looking lovely. You can really see it up close. And it's adding to the finished piece, even though we don't see that's really not forward. Now I'm going to glue these printables down because I'm going to want to paint them out. And I'm going to paint them, I'm going to glue them one at a time and paint them. And when I say paint, I'm taking white gesso and an angle brush and I'm really globbing it on there, adding a little bit of pink as well, just a hint. I don't want it to be too pink, but I do want to bring that pink that's in the background into the focal image. And I come back time and time again and add more white, add a little bit of pink. I'll be doing some shading later. So I'm really using that printable as the starting point, as the guide, but I can elongate a petal if I wish. Gluing another one down, and then I'll be painting it. Of course, I didn't wait for it to dry, so I smeared it. Because it's white on white, you're not really able to see that I'm globbing it on. And I move it fairly quickly because I do not want to be too terribly precise. And it's a bit of a dance with the color. I add more white, I add more pink. I'll come back and shade and line and do all that later on. And as you know, with flowers, every flower, even of this from on the same plant, doesn't look identical. Some are darker, some are lighter. And variation is what makes it interesting. And once it dries, you can see I'm keep going back until I'm happy. You can use a daisy from a napkin, you can use a daisy from a coloring book, you can use a daisy from a magazine. I will be doing a full recap of all the steps with my prompt and process cards at the end of the video. I'm adding gesso to the center of the flowers, and I've decided that I want to bring out that gold I put in the background, so I grabbed yellow ochre paint and I'm making the daisy have a yellow center. And this just brought life to the focal image in my mind. I'm mixing some with white gesso, some is going straight on. And then I decide, okay, I'm going to colorize this wreath. I'm going to put some yellow ochre on, mix it with brown, so it looks kind of like a grapevine wreath. But I want that yellow ochre in there because that works really well with the gold that's already in the background. That's all working together. I grab a stencil brush and some of that brown and I just kind of stencil a little bit or stipple it onto the center of the daisy. Now I'm using my liner brush and a mixture of brown and black and the yellow ochre just to make it look like branches. Not sure I was 100% successful with that. So I'm giving that a quick dry and I'm going to work on the sentiment. Now, as you know, I create sentiment packs and I went through my sentiment packs from my garden pack and I had one time for new beginnings, but I just took the part of the phrase and I'm using that and I'm stamping. Now I trace the curve. I thought it would be kind of cool to put this sentiment on the curve and I'm stamping kind of a prototype on paper. This is so I can audition it on the page and I can get the spacing. So I just drew a line on this by the side of the wreath and I wanted it to mirror the curve of the wreath. Wasn't quite in the right place, so I'm drawing another line and I'm just using my white Stabilo or my white charcoal pencil that will erase later. I want this fairly opaque, so I'm stamping in white acrylic paint and then cleaning it off my stamp. Now, as you're watching this, I was planning my entire creative process. I was doing this in the landscape mode, but I realized at this point, turning it just to be able to do it easier, I actually liked it in the portrait orientation as well. So which one do you like best? Portrait or landscape? I'm shading around the edge of the page, around the wreath, and around the flowers. And I'm using my angle brush and the floating acrylic shading technique. Shading around the flowers, I want to make it stand out. This is the focal image. I want it to stand out from that lovely background. But you want the background to be in the background. Now I'm doing shading right on the flowers. I'm using a combination of the quinacridone magenta with black. And you can see how much this adds to the focal image. It just brings light to it, or life to it, I should say. Erasing the charcoal pencil mark. And you can see, even though I've done a wash over that number scramble stencil, you can still see all those marks that I put there. Splattering with gold paint and making sure that I dry. Now I wanted to make a little bit more definition around the flowers, so I grabbed my charcoal, my General's charcoal. This is the medium one. And I'm holding it loosely in my hand and I'm sketching around the petals. I'm not trying to be too precise. Sometimes I go over it more than once. I'm not too careful about being right on the edge. So which orientation? So I started with gel prints and I collaged them down. That started my color story, gave me texture, and set me on my way. Great way to jumpstart your process. I stenciled, I stamped to make some pattern. I stenciled with some thick gesso through the stencil. Then I applied a base coat of color. Again, the colors that I chose were what was on those collage papers, those gel prints from the beginning. I did more stenciling using white to lighten the page. And even though I did a base coat of color on top or a wash, you can still see it. I used some DIY mark making tools that I made from sink liners and caps. I used some printable for the daisy and used that as the guide to paint my daisies. And I used kind of got a painterly effect. I shaded or highlighted the focal image. The wreath and the flowers. I knocked back some of the white stenciling by putting a wash of color. I did that at several different times throughout the process. I added a sentiment by stamping with my wooden stamps, letter stamps, and I put it on the curve to mirror the curve of the wreath. Edged the page using the floating acrylic, splattered with gold, and I doodled around with the charcoal pencil. Thank you so much for joining me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. Until next time, go get creative.